Hey, Sam, great to have you on the show. Would you please give people a little bit on your background and what you're doing today? I think we're going to have an interesting talk today.
Yeah, so my name is Sam Schutte. I'm CEO of Unstoppable Software in Cincinnati, Ohio. We're a custom software development company, and we work closely with business leadership to create strategic software solutions to amplify their profitability and their business success.
Okay, so you started with Unstoppable Software, which of course has me interested from the beginning. It's a great name. But then that statement you just made that I can't even repeat about this developing some software to strategically help them. Can you dive into that a little bit to give us some examples? Because I don't see enough people doing that.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, the type of projects we work on and what we do is we'll sit down, or I will sit down with business owners and executives, CEOs, and we look at, where are they wasting effort? Where are they wasting their human resources by having them shuffle paper, fool around in Excel sheets, just do these cumbersome manual things that, oftentimes it's the stuff they've been doing for a long time. And as their business has grown, now they're like really feeling the stress of like, every time every time we get a shipment in from a supplier, we get this piece of paper we have to deal with, right? And so we sit down and we kind of work out like, all right, well, what does that actually cost you, and how could we fix that? Could we build a web application, a mobile app, something like that to automate that process, to make some of the work the humans have to do, have a computer do it, these sorts of things, and it's all sort of stuff that we build completely from scratch with our software development team, and so they end up with a solution that really kind of squeezes all that important 20%, last 20% of value out of that really lets them get some really huge ROI on the project.
Well, I'm curious two things. One, how do you integrate with existing apps that they're using? And maybe the second piece is, can you give me an example? I love the direction you're going and what you're doing. Obviously, it's successful. You've been doing it for a long time. But I'd like to get a visual from it. Can you give me that?
Sure, absolutely. So, on the question of integration, I mean, I think you sort of have to have some software developers working for you that are, a little part hacker a little bit, and a little bit magician sometimes with, because some of these systems that companies are using, particularly large companies, I mean, they're not easy to integrate with if they're not an ultra, a super modern recent system. But there's always a way, and I mean, sometimes you have to resort to crazy stuff like screen scraping, where you're actually looking at the monitor and reading data, having the computer read data off the screen. Other times it's easier, and you just have to sort of figure out how to hack the underlying database. So there's always a way to get that data out, and build on top of the old system often, rather than having to replace it. You just have to have people that are willing to sort of investigate that. Um, and I think you asked for an example of a system we've worked on. So we did a system a little while ago, for instance, where this was with a behavioral health care provider, and so they work with thousands of children on their going through their behavioral health process, and so you're talking about psychiatrists, psychologists, stuff like that. And at the time they were doing everything on paper and a lot of shuffling and scanning and storing of paper files and all this sort of stuff. Um, and with that sort of system, there's no rules, right? I mean, if it's just what are the rules of what you're allowed to do with a piece of paper? There are none. You just do whatever you want, right? And so no one really followed process. And so we came in, and this was a number of years ago, but over a period of maybe 3 years, build a system that really tightly controls their process in a way that makes state regulators happy and all that sort of stuff, because they can closely see and verify that things are being done the right way. And that, meant that basically for every, probably they could get, uh, the same amount of work done that normally might take 10 people done with like 2 people, right? So pretty drastic reduction in effort, which meant then they had more capacity to see more patients and stuff like that, right? And so that's the bottom line. Why did they do it? So they could see more patients, right?
Yeah.
But
And
how do
also,
you
I
get
would
there? I mean, there's a
Yeah, I would assume it also gives them a lot better documentation. So when they need to submit documentation or refer to documentation for what these meetings happen, I know because I've adopted 5 kids. So
Yeah.
I've been in that system, and there's a lot of broken links there,
Well, yeah. And
and
I
a
actually,
lot of opportunities for efficiency.
we have an adopted son as well, so I've gone through that as well. Interesting. But yeah, and it's also just in that healthcare field, because really, like, our two main areas that we've done most, probably do 80%, 70% of our business in, is in manufacturing sector and healthcare sector, right? And then there's other, is the other 30% of things we get into, and there's a lot of really stiff penalties in healthcare that you don't necessarily see in manufacturing sector, right? I mean,
Yeah.
manufacturing, of course, like if something breaks and it causes damage or causes a death, like, yeah, there's liability, but there's not necessarily straight up penalties that you're going to get, and it's stuff like HIPAA, but there's also stuff like Medicaid, which the systems we were working on were processing a lot of Medicaid. And, there's pretty onerous rules around things. Like if you bill things incorrectly, they can come back and say, hey, everything we've paid you in the last 12 months, you have to give back. Like they can really smack you, and that may not be the exact rule, but, whereas, like I said, in manufacturing and other sectors, they don't face that kind of regulation. So that was the other thing looking at that project. It's like, okay, we increased their efficiency, but also what would it cost if you had one violation? Well, very big number. Okay, so we prevented that from ever happening next decade, right? So what
I'm
is that worth?
I'm wondering if you can give me a little bit more on how you are invited in and actually look at the strategic portion where you're identifying the bottlenecks, you're identifying the inefficiencies. And I recommend this to a lot to my clients that do outsourced IT services, that they need to become more of a partner of identifying those problems and then becoming a partner to solve them. They're not software development houses. I mean, you might be a resource for them to work with them. If you would please talk to me a little bit more, maybe provide another example where how do you actually go in and have that conversation and get down to where those bottlenecks are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, and I think it's a good point to make is that, while the product that we end up building is there, we're more than just a bunch of programmers, right? My really is that highly consultative, true consultant role, right? Um, I do product management as part of that, meaning like helping them invent a product that doesn't exist or help them refine it. Um, and, I mean, if you look at I have a computer science degree, I have an MBA. And so I kind of sit on that fence between the two, um, and help them get to the point where they're ready to build software. I think what a lot of IT services companies do, or the vast majority of my competitors, for that matter, is, we have some develop, tell us what you want them to do, and we'll go do it. And here's our hourly rate, whatever. What's the value there? What's the strategy to that? It's just outsourcing and stuff, right? And so the way I start with all of our customers, we start with a design and discovery sprint or design and discovery engagement, something like that we call it, where we spend a number of weeks, and they really have to kind of tell us or tell me, like, well, the why, like, well, why do you want to build this? Well, because it's not enough to just tell me, well, we need an app and it has to have these features. Well, I want to know why, right? Because unless they are software people, they don't know what's possible, right? And often through that process, we can find things that they didn't think of, features that are more valuable. And it's a lot of whiteboarding. Um, I think in particular when you're looking at like time savings, often we'll sit down in an Excel sheet or write it down on the whiteboard of like, right, how many hours a week does this particular type of employee in your company spend doing X, right? And they don't often go through that sort of time analysis process, right? Or know to, and add it up. If you have 500 employees that are spending 15 minutes a week on something, that can be a lot of excess cost that it might not seem like it's worth fixing, but it can be.
Sam, do you interview people in the company or do you go on site to observe process or anything like that?
Yeah, often, especially like in the manufacturing space, we want to go on the shop floor and see how things are being done, because that can influence sort of what we call a form factor of a solution. Meaning, is it something they can do on a phone? Is it something that they have to do handheld? I was doing a project a little while ago with they are primate research lab, one of the premier NIH funded labs in the U.S. here, and they wanted to do an app to gather data from their veterinarians and stuff looking at primates. And so, we go and you see them, and it's like, okay, well, can they do a touch screen? Well, they're wearing rubber gloves, right? They're wearing medical gloves. That's going to be hard. Well, can they do transcription? Well, they're wearing masks, so that voice recognition is not going to be great because they're around uh, potentially dangerous, diseases and everything else, right? So how do you get over that, and we looked at a variety of things like you can get transducive gloves, right, that will work with the touch screens, and so you have to kind of look at the way they work and their conditions to understand that you're not going to be able to just whip out a laptop and sit down. Um, I think even in that case, we had talked about, well, could they wear like a microphone around their neck? Well, no, because the animals will grab it and yank it. So that won't work either. And that's just like an case where it's like, well, how do you build software for these folks? Works, right? Um, and we had some ideas around that. But yeah, so it's important to interview and see the real world situation the users are working in, I think.
It sounds to me like you really gain a strategic edge in that your clients then view your organization as a strategic partner. Hey, we have a problem. We need to go talk with Sam, see if he's got any ideas. Is is there an example you can give me of a company that you went in, did a great project, and then they had this type of thought process? Because it's what I recommend to my clients. That's where you want to be, the strategic partner, the one that is not a cost, but actually is someone who's creating value. And so, is there an example you can give me where someone has come back maybe one, maybe multiple times because you did such a great job in the first project?
Yeah, I mean, really, the vast majority of our customers are repeat customers. I mean, especially if they're big enough where they want something for one division or department, and they're like, "Oh, we fixed that. Now we want to go fix this." If it's a small company that we come in and kind of did everything they need for that some time period. But yeah, there's a come back because sometimes it's that the business environment they're in will change and they need to solve a different problem. Um, or it's like I said, it's often that they'll say, okay, we took care of, this division's problem, and now we need to go take care of, the HR team's problem or something like that. And approach it the way where it's like, all right, you know, what are you really spending here? What makes them more efficient? What do they say? What do the users say? What do they want to do? Because most of the time, companies, people are used to using their phone and iPhone and all this sort of they're used to good quality solutions, right? At their fingertips for their sort of B2C needs, right? Their Facebook and they're paying bills or, looking at a statement, right? And so if you go to those end users and just, what do you think the solution is to this? Sometimes they'll tell you. Um, but I think it's important to your point in like all the messaging and the way we talk with customers, or we always talk about them being our partners and we're creating a partnership, and they volunteer that themselves. That's what they're looking for. Um, and I think it's partly because they know and they have experience that if they just go either hire them a bunch of software developers and as employees, or go to standard contract house and say, I need 3 guys for 6 months, then those guys sort of look and say, well, what is it you want us to do? You um,
Yeah, I
and
can hear
that's
how
sort
it's a totally different environment because I've actually hired
yeah.
a lot of software developers
Hmm.
overseas. I've worked in Russia, I've worked in some other countries, and then also had US people. But all the time that I've done it, it's always been exactly what you described.
Yeah.
Here's what I want done, go do this. There's no strategic partnership. And I think the strategic angle is extremely important, particularly in times like these. where
Mm.
companies need to be thinking out of the box. They need to really find some efficiencies that they've overlooked. They need to find some strategic edge that they've overlooked. Do you ever work with companies? You're talking about, it sounds like more enterprise companies, larger companies. Do you ever work with, I don't know, smaller organizations? They might be 50, 100, or just a few hundred employees, and you're dealing with more common apps like Office 365 has all kinds of potential, but all kinds of gaps. I'm very frustrated by the whole environment because, like Teams or whatever you want to pick, they kind of threw it out there and I don't know what happened. Then they moved away from doing things quickly, and really I haven't seen any significant updates in a long time. Do you end up doing any work where you're streamlining some more common applications that companies are using?
I guess so. It depends, So for the larger customers we have, um, sometimes they'll have, it may be a very kind of custom process that they want us to do, or it might be something that is a little more common, like you said, but they're large enough that it's worth it for them to pay to make it exactly the way they want. Okay. So now we've never been hired to write a word processor, because that's a little bit too common probably, but we
Yes.
have been hired to write like their very own custom CRM. And there are a lot of CRMs on the market, and so why would you write your own Salesforce? Because if it's worth it to you to do so, if you have 10,000 salespeople or something and you need it to work in a way that Salesforce won't, then it might be worth it. And we do work with, on the smaller and more mid-sized companies. And, a lot of our customers are, 25, 50 employees, 100 employees, something like that. In their case, it's usually something that there is really no off-the-shelf solution for, or anything that is sort of common. So, it would be rare for those sort of companies to hire us to build like a CRM or like a SharePoint portal type thing. It happens sometimes, but it's more usually that they want to build some product that's really key to like their offering to their customers, right? Um, so like we had been doing some work with a company that sort of like a metals product processing equipment producer, right? And they wanted to build a web-based dashboard that basically, for their customers who are sitting back in their home or on the beach on vacation or whatever, they could pull up all the data and see like what is my factory line in Japan doing right now, right? And then they were going to sell that, as a product, a subscription product. So now, okay, what they really make is, this machinery, right? But now they're getting into a whole other product line of data and a SaaS product, right? Um, so usually on the those more mid and small size customers, it's a product that their end customers are going to use, that is like unique in their own like invention. Whereas I think the larger customers can afford to say, you know what, we want to make our legal team process documents faster, right?
It
I don't know
makes
if that makes
perfect
sense, but
sense. No, it makes
yeah.
perfect sense. One of the things with custom software developers is sometimes they develop a product that then they can spin off on their own or they can use with other clients. Does that happen with you guys at all?
Not, I don't think it's complete. We've talked about that a few times with customers, and now all of our customers always, ask and they make sure, like, well, we're gonna own this code, right? And I mean, obviously, we assign all that ownership right to them, as but there have been a couple cases where they've said, like, well, what if, would you take this to market and then you paid us a royalty back from whatever you grew it into, and we've taken it to the point where we discussed, like, okay, let's set up a new entity, and you guys will get 3 of the 12 board seats or something, and and sort of spin out your product to take to market, and then you would basically just get a revenue stream from it, right? We haven't really taken that to the finish line yet, but I think you do hear people doing that. You just have to be careful because then it, of course, become your complete focus.
Yes. And
Trying
so
to grow
talking
that
about
product.
your business, how many people do you have in your organization now?
So we have about 12, 15 people now, which is mainly software developers and myself. I have an assistant as well, and some other resources to sort of help on the marketing side as well.
Now you've been an entrepreneur for a while. You've started several companies. I mean, what advice would you have for people that are entrepreneurs or are thinking of being entrepreneurs? What are kind of some of the key make it or break it things they need to keep in mind or learn?
So what I always tell people, so yeah, I mean, I think I've started, I don't know, Unstoppable third company. I've started another few others past this. Uh, I think one thing is there is no right time to start a company, right? Um, when I started Unstoppable Software, my wife was pregnant, our house was on the market. I was in night school for my MBA, and it was 2008. That's not a good year. I
Not
mean,
exactly.
things were already. I mean, I started in January of '08, but there was a lot of, oh, there's going to be a recession, and of course, October, everything really crashed, right? Uh, but I think even around that time, we actually didn't sell our house until later that year. So just a lot going on. And I think probably earlier people would have said, well, now's not the time. I got so much going on. I should wait. Right. But sometimes, in my opinion, like if you just get started and then you start getting some momentum, that you got to start the sort of like sooner you get up the hill, right. Or up the mountain. Because if I had
Will you
waited enough,
talk to me about that a little bit? Because it's one thing to start it, but then I run into some people who kind of put their toe in the water, but then they don't do anything else. So how do
yeah.
you start it, maintain your other stuff, but still keep it moving forward? How did you manage your time to make that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and so like I said, Unstoppable third company. The prior two I had started were very like part-time type things, right? So, had a full-time job, was working nights and weekends on some venture. And it's just so hard to dedicate real time to. I mean, it's just there aren't enough hours in the day, right? And I think that the only way to really uh, commit to the success of a company is to make it your only lifeline, right? I think those have like some job or some other thing going on. Um, are you going to take the risks? Because you have to take the big risks if you want, the kind of big rewards to come out of it. Um, and I think for me, and I guess the other thing I'll say is, I think there's sort of like only two ways companies get created. People plan and plan and plan. They make a business plan. They save up their money. They do all this stuff till they're ready to quit their job, and then they do it, take the jump. Which I think that's really hard. I think that's rare because like when's the right time? And then there's people that just have nothing to do, right? you know, and that was really me. It was like, all right, I finished a contract I was on, and I had a friend that said, "Hey, do you want to come do some consulting with us?" With his company. Um, so it's like, you can't sit around and plan it forever because the time will never be right. And, and imagine like, so in that case, this friend of mine I mentioned, he had just gotten promoted to be president at a large German company. And he said, hey, why don't you come do some consulting? So I did, one man up, all that sort of thing. Right. And started that in January of '08. Right. I mean, that company's still my customer. They're a, $60 billion company. And here 12 years later, I mean, I'm working on some pretty big pieces of business with them. But if I hadn't done it then, if I had said, oh, no, let me wait till I get to my degree or something, or save up more money, how would I have ever come back to it? You'd miss that
What
opportunity. So,
what advice would you have for entrepreneurs today? This economic environment, unparalleled, and now things are starting to loose up. We've still got pandemic worries. We got a lot of people operating out of fear. I think I read yesterday 100,000 businesses, it's estimated, will not reopen. Oh, how
mhm.
can people go out in a wise, prudent way and build an existing business when maybe they have to pivot, do some different things, or maybe not? Or, maybe they still, like you, feel it might be time for them to start a business. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and I think particularly since I started a business in the Great Recession period, sort of, right? Or at least was really getting off the ground in that era. I mean, I think one thing is don't give yourself the excuse in your head like, well, I can't do it now because or, it's terrible. It's terrible times. Now's the wrong time, right? There's always success stories. There's always people out there killing it. And business. I mean, you look at Zoom, for instance. I mean, uh, 3 months ago, how many people had even heard of Zoom? And now I just read today they're opening offices in Pittsburgh and uh, maybe like North Carolina and some other places. So they're exploding, right? So there's always like an opportunity for success. Um, and I think, I mean, you do have to sort of like, you have to be smart about what you're doing. You can't just say, well, I'm just going to do the same thing I would have done in a normal time, right? But I mean, I think a lot of consultants are being hired to do stuff right now because people, I mean, if you're a consultant in the space of like, business uh, innovation or something, I would imagine this is a good time. People are hiring you to like, hey, I need to figure out what to do. Um,
I suggest this goes back to what you said earlier, though, where the reason you pulled it off and a key thing that people need to think about, and I didn't have this planned when I asked the question, is what value do you bring? You really bring a huge value in that you're not allowing someone to say, hey, we have this project, go do this. You're going in and saying, time out. I want to know more. You got to tell me more so I can understand this, whether you're going on site, whether you're interviewing people. And I think that's a key reason you made it during a difficult time, because that was an awful time, 2008.
well, and we've been closing all kinds of business in the last 2 months. I mean, we've had projects that have been sitting around for 4 months not closing that are closing now. And I think it's because the value equation has not changed. Like
Yeah.
now, maybe it's changed a little. Maybe there's risks now that they won't get like an 8x return or something on their investment. Maybe it'll be a 5x return. But I think everybody realizes that they will, like our customers. They aren't pessimists that they're not going to get through this. I think if you're a business or a business owner that, let's say you have a 300 employee company and you're like, oh, we're doomed, we're going out of business. I mean, that's that's not a good mindset to have. Like, you'll get through it, somehow. And I think as far as being prudent, starting a business now, I have a friend who, so he got laid off from his job. This was probably about 4 weeks ago, and went right out and incorporated a business, right? And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, here he is. He could be sitting around saying, oh, I got fired, and how am I going to pay my mortgage and all this? But he's looking at the real numbers. Like, look, he's got 6 months of mortgage forgiveness. He doesn't have to pay his mortgage because of COVID stuff, right? He doesn't have to pay his car payment, same reason. Um, and he has contacts in his field industry, right? Now, you know, so it's sort of like, what risks is he really taking? You know, um, and I think a lot of people would sit there and say, "Yeah, but he doesn't have a job. He doesn't have full time employment. It's so scary." And it's like, well, obviously, his last job wasn't that secure. I mean, it evaporated. So what has he
Yeah.
got to lose? Now, should he go and take out a $250,000 loan from the SBA? I mean, probably not, right? And that's what I think I sort of advise friends of mine and peers. It's like, work from home. You have a laptop. Keep your costs down. There's no reason to go rent some big office, because you hear people saying like, "Oh, office space is so cheap now with all these vacancies. Get a big, beautiful office downtown when I start my company." It's crazy, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to pinch your pennies now, um, but be strategic about what you're spending.
Yeah. I like to use what I call a CRT model: low cost, low amount of resources, low amount of time to prove you've got something viable.
Yeah,
So you go step by step, kind of a lean startup type of
yeah,
model. And I
prototype
think
it.
I think what you're alluding to is really important for everyone to keep in mind. And that is, you may have had some projects that had a clear ROI or value for people to do in the past, but cash was more easy then and things were going okay. So it's like, yeah, we can get to that when we have time. Now they're really looking for strategic decisions to make that will increase opportunities or lower costs. And that's really necessary in this environment. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think that's true, because some what I have found is a lot of in really good times when everybody's fat and happy. It depends on the company and the market and everything, but some companies, they stop spending then on certain problems, right? Because
Yeah.
they say, well, we don't need to. We're making so much money operating poorly.
Yeah.
um, And not everybody thinks that say, well, now we've got excess cash, let's invest, so on and so forth. But I mentioned that one of our larger clients, when market crashed and then got worse and worse in like '09 and all that, and you to go down. I remember them saying, "Look, we have 8 years cash in the bank to operate. We could we could never make another event right now, and we could run the company. Our competitors don't have that, right? So we want to invest a lot of money into new solutions and new technology now because we know everybody else is cutting back. That when we come out of this, we operate significantly cheaper than they do, right? That's pretty
Yeah.
smart because what else are they going to sit around? What else are they going to $1 billion, or whatever the number was?
Yeah.
Um, and other companies, I think, do tighten their belts, but there's always folks out there that are, you know, thinking critically and trying to improve.
Yeah. Good point. Now, before we wrap up, I'm kind of curious. I noticed that you're doing some stuff with renewable fuels or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe another venture, whatever. Will you please talk about that? Because this, I think, is the whole energy spectrum and getting our reliance off of oil. I'm really intrigued by it. And I didn't have time to look into exactly what you're doing, but if you can give us some insights on that, I'd love to learn more.
Yeah. So it's funny. So like I mentioned, I do a lot of work in the manufacturing space when it comes to technology, and a lot of those companies that I work with, I mean, they're producers or food producers, stuff like that. And probably about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I got some interest in some of the circular economy type ideas and type of is, and I this idea to get into renewable fuels, and it took a few years just get connected to some folks, knew some stuff about it, and I had to learn a lot of stuff about it. Basically, about 3 years ago, a company called Syntheca Energy. Um, and we have some partners, in the mining space, in the fuel market space, and all this sort of stuff. Basically, we're building waste to energy facilities in the Iowa, Kentucky, Indiana area, um, and so it's sort of taken on its own life, and it's been interesting because there's a whole ton of stuff I've been able to apply from my work as a consultant with technology and manufacturers that crosses right over into that. I mean, I'm still selling services to the same companies. It's just different kinds, right? And so that company, like I said, we closed on a round of funding in May this year, and we've got our first about maybe 6 out of our permits in place for it, and working now on kind of money to get it built. But basically producing renewable natural gas. So
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm glad to hear it. So, as we wrap up here, any last advice you'd like to give the entrepreneurs? I think this has been very helpful. We don't hear enough about engaging with our clients at a strategic level, and I think you've made some great points there. But anything you want to close with, Sam?
yeah, I mean, just I'm always happy to help people about ideas. I mean, I find that just about every business owner I know has ideas for something that they'd love to build. It sounds like even if you could build something to replace the 365 or something, you might. And there's always I am a connoisseur of tools and sort of websites and based tools and all this out there. So uh, I always am happy to talk to anybody about big or small challenges they're facing with the tools they use to do their job. So happy to discuss if anybody wants to reach out.
Well, that's great. What's the best way for them to reach you? Although, of course, we'll put that on the site. But anybody who's just listening.
So they can go to our website, which is unstoppablesoftware.com. So it's unstoppable. Um, they can find me on LinkedIn, Sam Schutte. That's SCHUTTE. Or my email is just schutte@unstoppablesoftware.com.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Sam, for being with us. I appreciate it. I think it's been some great tips, and I wish you the best in your ventures. And maybe we'll get an opportunity to work together on software sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
Okay, we're off.
Great.
Anything I could have done differently to make that better for you?
No, I think it was great. No problem. No suggestions. It's a good conversation. Hopefully people, it's always tricky for me to know if I'm explaining things well, but often it's like, I feel like if the host is understanding what we're doing, then I must be doing.
No, I think we're fine. I had some ups and downs with my connections. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I got to see whether maybe my daughter was doing some videos for school or something while I was on. So, like right now, it's.
I if you have any issues, I did do a record to a backup device because I comes out of my preamp and goes in. So I back up all the recordings. So if your audio and it's messed up, I have a copy here.
Okay, good. Well, hold on to it. I will let Jeff know that you have
Yeah.
that. You've been the first guest that's had that. So, otherwise,
I lost.
Go ahead.
I say for my podcast, after having lost an episode or two because of problems, I just started making an external backup. So yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. So I will let Jeff know. He usually turns it around within 1 or 2 business days. So and then he'll send you all a link so you can send it out to your audience too.
Well, I appreciate it, David, and yeah, if there's ideas you want to talk about or whatever, happy to vet them with you.
Well, thanks. I love your approach. So anyway, would love it if our paths crossed.
Yeah.
There was an opportunity to work together.
Yeah.